talking about it? Delayed for the 8th time?
Audience, you're going to have to wait to find out after this ad.
Dum dum.
This podcast is sponsored by Restream. Why live stream to one platform when you can simultaneously live stream to every platform to discover new audiences faster using Restream.io? I'm still shocked, just kidding. This episode is all about, will Cyberpunk 2077 grow your YouTube channel? I have been relentlessly studying video games for the last 10 years full-time, advising tens of thousands of creators on what games they should cover, even making trending algorithms for games specifically for creators with Andrew Perrin, and I'm here with expert analyst Ross A. Dillon, who has the #1 gaming Twitter account for the memes ever. Ross, let's break this thing down and tell people what we really think is going to happen with Cyberpunk and whether it's really going to grow their channel. You ready to do this, buddy?
Yeah, well, let's just start right there. What do you really think is going to happen with Cyberpunk?
Okay, let's take a look at the numbers. Go ahead and pull up Google Trends for me. I want to take a look at the numbers so everybody can see what the real deal is. And here, Ross, if you could go ahead, and this is a training for everybody who uses Google Trends. Go ahead and select, instead of web search, select YouTube search so we can see how much interest there is specifically on YouTube. And let's go ahead and take a look at a 5-year timeline. Actually, roll it back as far back as it'll go, 2008 to present. Awesome.
All right, let's see what we got here.
What we have to do is compare Cyberpunk 2077 to previous games that are similar to Cyberpunk 2077 in terms of YouTube growth. And as you can see, Grand Theft Auto 5 had a mega spike there with that yellow line in the past. And then the red line that you see with the mega spike is Red Dead Redemption 2 when it launched. So the question is, can Cyberpunk 2077 achieve the level of YouTube search interest of these titles that are most similar to it, these two other open world titles? And then after launch, is it going to see the massive decline after the mega spike at launch? Now, if I am going to speculate, I think it's going to land somewhere between Grand Theft Auto 5's launch and Red Dead Redemption 2's launch. For reasons that you were telling me prior to the podcast, there were some not so impressive numbers when it comes to Cyberpunk when you compare it to Red Dead, right?
Well, some a firm called M Science, they do data analytics. They were comparing at from the date of the release where we are now. So for example, Red Dead Redemption 2 comparable time at pre-launch had 31% more pre-orders than what Cyberpunk does. And I think that's pretty noteworthy, especially because I think everybody kind of expected Cyberpunk to be one of the biggest games in the past decade. And seeing it kind of come in where it's like, okay, well, it's not going to do as good as Red Dead Redemption 2. But I also think that we have to give credit to where credit's due on how freaking amazing Red Dead Redemption 2 is. So I actually don't know how telling this actually is, if that makes any sense.
It makes sense to me because and if you don't mind pulling up the gameplay there, we'll flip to it as we're kind of discussing Cyberpunk 2077. But the bottom line is the types of video games that grow YouTube channels are not single player games. Single player games don't grow channels. There's like maybe 1 or 2 channels that can cover single player games on all of YouTube for your particular language. And then those YouTubers will cover, guides on all the equipment, guides on all the classes, updates as DLC comes out. They might even do multiple playthroughs with different challenges. And they often just run out of content to cover because single player games don't have that much content to cover. And Cyberpunk 2077 is going to be no exception when it comes to the single player mode for the game. And we talked about this earlier, Ross. They are developing the multiplayer version of Cyberpunk separately as a completely separate game, not even launching in 2021. They haven't given us a date at all. It's 2022 at the very earliest. And so if we want to talk about what are the attributes of a game that grows YouTube channels, number 1, it's multiplayer. So everybody out there who thinks that they're going to cover the single player version of Cyberpunk 2077 and blow up their YouTube channel, you're pretty much all wrong. You're just basically all wrong. The only content there is that's kind of unlimited if you will, is the lore space for a single player game, because you can dive in on that lore, you can do fan fiction, you can do theories, you can guess what's going to happen in the upcoming DLC, and you can kind of extract all of the lore of that universe, including Cyberpunk lore from the tabletop game, from the comics, from the game itself, and you can do a ton of lore content. But as far as gameplay content is concerned, there's not much to do. It's only going to be a 30 to 40 hour game. You could maybe make, I don't know, 50, 60 videos about it, and it's tapped. And so YouTubers, there's going to be millions of them covering Cyberpunk 2077, doing their playthrough, doing their guides, what's the best gun, things like that. And almost all of them will fail. And you have to wait until the multiplayer version of this game comes out for you to be successful. So successful games require multiplayer. I mean, can you think of any big streaming games, Ross, or any big YouTuber games, Ross, other than Skyrim, that are single player that have really blown up a channel ever?
Well, even games like Skyrim and Fallout and series like that, they have mods, which in its own weird sense is almost a multiplayer aspect, because I don't know, because it can also bring more people in to get involved just with the creation of the mods and stuff. But what worries me about this, and by the way, you're right, what worries me about this is I'm going to bring this chart back up right here. Look at where Red Dead Redemption 2 is, and I'm assuming this was right around the release. I mean, that it's like almost double what GTA 5 was, and you still don't see very much. We're talking about multiplayer. They came out with the multiplayer much later for this, or at least the updates. I don't see a scenario where if Red Dead Redemption's multiplayer is what it is, and it's not, I don't see that growing any channels either. The fact that we have a 2-year minimum wait, it's I don't know. I question if even after that 2-year mark, if it's going to be worth it, just based on what we've seen with Red Dead Redemption 2 and how its multiplayer hasn't really contributed to the growth of a lot of channels.
I agree. You see this scenario a lot. So you made a great point a moment ago about modding. If the game isn't multiplayer, but it has modding, then you can have an unlimited, essentially, amount of content to cover on your YouTube channel. It's all about how much content can you make about the game, and the more content you can make about the game, the better the odds are that you can be successful with the YouTube channel with it. So multiplayer obviously makes that happen because other players add variety to the game. Modding adds even more variety to the game. And then constant updates and DLC adds even more variety of the game. And the fourth component that's really essential to successful YouTuber games, of course, is tens of millions of dollars in marketing budget. Cyberpunk 2077 single player only does one of those things that we just mentioned. I'm sorry, two of the things that we just mentioned. It will have DLC and it will have a big marketing budget, but it doesn't have modding and it doesn't have multiplayer. So I would say that Cyberpunk, just based on the criteria that we've established, based on every single game that has ever been successful, for YouTubers, it's a mediocre game at best. It's a mediocre game at best. And the big YouTubers, the multi-million subscriber channels, Rad Brad, even PewDiePie, maybe, and like everybody's going to be piling on board with Let's Plays. Let's Plays are completely off the table for this game. Nobody's going to be able to do a Let's Play and be successful unless they're doing something incredibly unique that no one else is doing. And so lore, as I mentioned earlier, is the only thing to dive into where you can really break through. There's going to be, and you may be thinking, I'm going to do new player guides. I'm going to do top 10s. I've got my own plan and my own idea. Look, go ahead and give it a shot. If that's what you want to make, go do it. You be passionate about it. But just keep in mind, you're going to be competing with thousands, if not millions, of creators for that particular type of content. And when we see the trend of what's going to happen with Cyberpunk 2077, Ross, it's going to spike and it's going to crash immediately. And then what is going to keep the interest up after that? DLC 6 months later? You got six.
Even DLCs. Like I've never seen a massive spike in YouTube trends just because of a DLC. In fact, I think, what does that buy you? A couple weeks, maybe a month of content?
Yeah, I mean, the DLC maybe will give you 1 month of content. You can stretch it out to 2 months, depending on how juicy it is. You can, leading up to the DLC or any sort of update for any game, you can talk about, the devs, did the latest Night City Wire, and they gave us some hints on what was happening there. Oh, I don't know what happened to gameplay there. There it is. They gave us some hints about what's happening, and then you tease it in a news video. And then once it launches, you can show all the content in it and do a guide on it and say best ways to farm XYZ. And after that, you're out of content. Time to wait another 6 months to 9 months to a year till the next DLC. So for those of you planning on making Cyberpunk channels, you have to cover literally everything about the game to even have enough content to even support a channel. You'd have to cover the news, the lore, the tabletop game, the culture and internet stuff happening around it, maybe do an RP gameplay thing, do guides on top of that, do community events. You're going to have to put in so much effort to make content out of the game because there's not going to be enough content in the game. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So how would your opinion change if multiplayer was coming out day one?
My opinion would be completely different if multiplayer was coming out day one. I would say Cyberpunk 2070. I mean, depending on what the details are about the multiplayer, of course. If multiplayer were launching at the same time as single player, Ross, for this game, this would go from being a 5 out of 10 game to cover on your YouTube channel to like a 9 out of 10. Guaranteed. Now, the multiplayer could fall flat on his face, of course, and it could be not very interesting and not very good, of course. And it could be not very deep. But if it was multiplayer, that would mean that it would fit the criteria that we mentioned earlier. It would be multiplayer, obviously. It would have DLC. It would have the giant marketing budget and hype. And it would have, and it would also potentially have modding in the longer term, depending for the single player as well. And that'd be like a longer term thing for PC players. We'll see how open CD Projekt Red is to that. But they don't have the multiplayer at launch. And so that means that you've only got 4 life paths that you can play through in the game. And so once you play through all 4, which the amount of variety between the different life paths will be noticeable for sure. But, let's say most generously, the different life paths only give you about 20% different content. Nomad, Street Kid, Corpo, as on the screen right now, maybe 20% different content. Your playthrough of the game is going to be about 80% the same, right? Now, you can choose different builds. You can choose different, gameplay elements that you want to do. You can make different decisions, of course, and see what the different outcomes are. But at the end of the day, viewers are just going to be like, it's the same fucking gameplay I just watched before, and I've played it myself. What's new here? What's the fresh stuff here? And that's why games like Fortnite have done so well, is because they not only have multiplayer and giant marketing budget and the whole nine, they've got completely new gameplay elements to check out all the time. It's absolutely preposterous.
Literally, all the time. And that's why it's also not going away anytime soon as well.
That's right. You can play as Spider-Man. You can play as Keanu Reeves. You can play as Thanos. What's that in the middle of the map? Some giant hole? And there's a whatever? Like, they've got crazy stuff going on all the time. Cyberpunk is not going to bring that to the table. If you look at The Witcher 3, The Witcher 3 was a successful game in terms of sales and everything. But at the end of the day, The Witcher 3 didn't make or break. Maybe it made like 1 or 2 YouTubers popular, if that. And that's it. So just because you have a great game, and just because there's a lot of interest in a great game, doesn't mean it's a great game for YouTubers. The same thing is the case for basically every other single-player game that has ever existed on YouTube. And that's just the bottom line. And with GTA 5 in particular, with multiplayer, there were YouTubers that really grew their channel leading up to that game, back when YouTube was way less saturated. I'm thinking about Typical Gamer. Typical Gamer is one of those guys. He ended up becoming one of the biggest gaming YouTubers out there because he did pre-launch coverage of GTA 5. Then when GTA 5 came out, he did daily uploads for GTA 5, and then GTA 5 multiplayer came out after that, and then modding was enabled. So it was the perfect storm for him to ride the GTA 5 trend to grow his YouTube channel and so many other creators. And that's why GTA 5 is so popular today, guys, is because it's literally only because it fit all of the criteria I just told you. Multiplayer, modding, DLC, giant multi-million-dollar budget. It does all 4 at the same time, and that's why it's so big. So if CD Projekt Red is missing any of those 4 elements, it will be significantly less popular as a result. So, Red Dead Redemption 2, Ross, it kind of fit all those criteria I told you, right? So why wasn't it a mega YouTuber title? Why wasn't it a mega title? Am I wrong? Do those criteria work all the time and I'm just wrong about this?
No, but I think honestly it all kind of follows down to there was no multiplayer, or the multiplayer was pretty much garbage at launch. It's still pretty much garbage. I think that the fact that the game has garbage multiplayer is probably the sole reason why it stands where it is now. In fact, I'm trying to sit here while you're talking. I'm trying to think of a game that where their multiplayer has rejuvenated it so much post-launch that it's worth picking back up and worth content creators focusing on. And maybe because we're still kind of new to that territory of a multiplayer launching 2 years after the launch of a game, but I can't think of anything where that's happened. I think it's silly to assume that it would happen with Cyberpunk. That, you know, it's like you said with typical gamer, he built it up pre-launch and then he released daily videos on it. I don't see a scenario where if it's going to work, it's going to work like it worked for typical gamer. Then it worked for one person. Maybe there are a few others that saw some hits off of it as well. But other than that, I don't see a scenario where more than like 1 or 2 people are going to be able to really take control of the Cyberpunk 2077 content on YouTube. I don't know. I say that, and I'm going to be buying the game the first day it comes out. I hope it's going to crush. It's going to be an awesome game, I think. But being an awesome game to play and being an awesome game to create a content strategy around are 2 completely different scenarios.
You're totally right. Let me give 2 recent examples. So the reason why I wanted to do this episode is I wanted to warn YouTubers and warn streamers that think they're going to get big on this game. It's probably not going to happen, guys. I'm sorry. And take a look at 2 recent examples then, not just these historical GTA example and Red Dead Redemption example. Take a look at the most recent God of War game and take a look at the most recent Spider-Man game. Both sold like gangbusters. Massive reviews, full industry coverage, multi-million-dollar budgets, fantastic games, right? Everybody universally loved them. And they're excited for the future games in those franchises. How many YouTubers built a channel on those again? How many? I can't think of one that built one of God of War or any game similar to that. No, the answer is none. No YouTubers did. But it was a huge trend, and it was so popular, and it had advertising, and it was a great game. It's like, yeah, so what? It didn't have multiplayer, it didn't have modding, and it didn't have regular DLCs that kept it super interesting, so it doesn't matter. You know what I'm saying? It's just it's the equation for success. And if the game you're covering doesn't fit the equation for success, then it's probably not going to work out. So Ross, okay, we're talking about how Cyberpunk doesn't work out. What games are going to work out then? And let's give them a little bit of hope, right? About which games would work out. I ask you that same question because I can't think of any off the top of my head. I would say Halo Infinite, but God knows if that's even going to be coming out in the next year or 2. Okay, really quick. I will give your Call of Duty. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, I was just going to say, obviously, Call of Duty is going to be one that you can consistently rely on for some growth, I think. What did you have in mind? Really quick, I need to talk about our sponsor, Restream.io. Then I'm going to give everybody my official list of games that I think will work out. Restream, we're restreaming right now. Hi, guys. I can see all of your feeds right here. Twitch, DLive, Facebook, YouTube, Periscope. All of your chats right over here. How's it going? We are sponsored by Restream.io. My wife is looking at me. Hi. We're sponsored by Restream.io, and we'll put a link in the description. Can you please drop the link into chat, if possible, Ross? I don't know if you have that, if you can do that. The link in chat, $10 off your first month of Restream.io, and if you use code DROP25, DROP25 with no space, that's DROP25 with no space, you get 25% off Restream.io, and you can stream on multiple platforms and grow faster. So very quickly, in like 1 minute. Here's my list, and then we got to end the episode of games that can grow YouTube channels, and we can do a whole episode on this later. Games that can grow YouTube channels, based on the criteria I just outlined a moment ago. Diablo Mobile, Diablo 4, The Elder Scrolls 6, Halo Infinite multiplayer, Cyberpunk 2077 multiplayer, Skull and Bones, and then Anthem 2.0. So all those titles I just told you fit the criteria I just gave you, right? They're multiplayer, they have DLCs, they have multi-million-dollar budgets, and some of them are going to be moddable. Those are the big games that are going to potentially grow channels because they fit those criteria. Most of them will probably fizzle and die, but some of them will become mega titles, and you will see million-plus subscriber channels grow from these titles in the future. Ross?
That was perfect. That nailed it. I will be very curious to see what happens with Anthem 2.0. I think that deserves a whole episode on its own. Anyway, we are on every audio platform. Go find us there. Go watch the replay on YouTube. Other than that, have a great weekend. Sorry to bust your bubble on Cyberpunk today, but we do it because we love you. We'll see you Monday.